You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hello, people-centric leaders. Today on this special people-centric podcast, we are joined by me, of course, Philip Herzog. You know my voice. And if you don't, it's good to see you. It's good to hear or be heard by you. And we also have the Bethany Taff and Diana Royalty.
Hello. It's Bethany Taff, not Diana Royalty.
But hi, this is Diana Royalty. Also, I want to just put it out there. We're in a weird mood today. I think we all are just like wanting some silly and some goofy, but this is not a silly, goofy topic. I don't know where we're going to go. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen.
None of us know anything, but we know one thing. One thing is this. One, you have influence. And two, today we're talking about how this influence shows up, how it impacts as a leader, as a team member, when we talk about good intent. I had the best of intent in introducing the topic and introducing my co-hosts, and maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. I don't know. Hi, guys, I had a good intent, and the rest of that falls on you. I don't know about that. So a few questions. Good intent is something we talk about as a team, and it can often be a good thing, right? We assume good intent as leaders, and that's going from a place of strength and trusting relationships, having compassion on those around us. But we've noticed sometimes that good intent is almost weaponized or is used as a smokescreen or an excuse. And we have a lot of leaders that say it's hard to know the balance between assuming good intent while also holding people accountable or developing them and making it a great team environment still, right? Good intent can be true, but still there can be consequences or extra work from an action. So to kick us off, I'm curious, this is my question. Why do so many people use the phrase, "that wasn't my intent"? And sometimes that might come across as the end of a conversation instead of the beginning of ownership.
This is a great question. And I think this is sort of where this topic came from, is we've seen that happen a few times lately where people are just like, okay, well, that thing happened, but it wasn't my intent for that outcome. So you should just drop it and leave it alone. I didn't mean for that to happen. And I think because this assigning intent has become sort of like a general knowledge, a general, like, I don't know, something that people are talking about more and more, I think it is now become something that you can excuse yourself from the responsibility a little bit. And I think people are not taking the concept of assigning intent and maturing that. The assigning intent and saying like, it wasn't my intent, so get over it. That's the very baseline immature reaction to assigning intent. And I think there's a deeper level to it.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when I think about this, like I think about conversations I've had with my kids all the time where it's like I'm constantly like trying to, feels like I'm a ref. And they will say this all of the time. And like, obviously adults are saying this too, in different situations and settings. But when I hear my kids say it, it's like, well, I didn't mean to, or I wasn't trying to hurt you, or I wasn't, whatever. And, as a mom, I think that's when it's like, when you put yourself in a different context, like with kids, sometimes you zoom out and you're like, it makes a lot of sense. It feels a lot more clear than whenever we use it in our grown-up lives and worlds and situations, but it's really not different. And so when my kids say, well, I didn't mean to, I have to say, I understand you didn't mean to do that. That wasn't what you were planning. You weren't trying to hurt your sister. You weren't trying to, make them feel bad or whatever, but it still did. So I know it was an accident, or I know you didn't mean to, and they were hurt. So can you say sorry to them? Like, you probably need to apologize to them, or can you help them with this thing, or, whatever. And it's like there's this, I think there's just a really natural like self-protection thing that we all have within us that's like, oh, we have to like it's that term that we use because we're trying to protect ourselves in that moment because we don't want to be blamed for somebody else's pain.
I love your examples. And Bethany, your point of not being blamed for pain or not being blamed for the mistake or the expensive thing or the delayed timeline or the wrong fit employee I thought we should hire, like whatever those things might be. And Diana, your word of maturity, I was thinking, an immature use of good intent is like, whoa, hey, clearly I did not mean for that to happen. I'm a part of our team. I want us to win here. Kind of putting that emphasis back on you, like, wow, clearly you think so badly of me. That wasn't my intent, as opposed to, whoa, wow, I did not realize you thought that way. Or I know this is significant and I did not want it to happen. What I meant to have happen was XYZ. I think another way it's referred to often is that attribution bias. Like I will attribute my I'll attribute the things I do wrong to what I know I was trying to do. But I'll attribute what you do wrong to my objective view of you just weren't thinking of all the details, right? I know why I made a mistake versus you clearly made a mistake for different reasons. And so it's taking out that narrative or that bias story and really just like applying it mutually in all areas. To your point, Bethany, of like whether it's your kids to your team.
Yeah, I was thinking about an example of like, what if I messed up at my job and I just said like it wasn't my intent. So like let's say Philip and Bethany that I didn't pay you, that I like misran payroll, didn't pay you. And then I just came to you and said, well, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intent. I didn't mean to not pay you. You would still expect me to pay you, right? There's a responsibility there that I have to say, it wasn't my intent. I messed it up. How can I make it right? Right. And I think it's that second part of, I'm going to own this thing that I did and say, well, it wasn't my intent and I would never want to do that to you. And I didn't mean to like take food off your family's table. Right. Like, but now I have to own it and say, how can I make it right? And I think it's that second part of like, what do I do to fix this, even if it wasn't my intent?
Yeah, I love that point. Sharing what happened, a little bit of that story. Were it to happen, I would imagine some wild things have happened if Diana did not submit payroll, right? But our team would notice. We would all notice. I always joke, I'm like, one of the most sacred agreements between any organization and their team, it's paying them. If you don't do that, and just for the record, Diana, your track record, have you ever missed a payroll?
Oh God, no. No, I have not. No.
Which for the record, we have to keep it straight.
Thank
And
you.
that would show for our team, like how wildly outlandish it would be. The first question would be, whoa, you better have my money. And then second, what happened?
Hang on. Are you okay?
Is everything all right? Yeah. Where are we gonna is Diana alive? We'll call Jimmy.
Yeah.
Fly.
Yeah.
And I your point of like, how do we fix this mistake moving forward? Like the context, because there would have to have been context. If it's just, I forgot. You're like, wow, that's really unsatisfactory and very inconvenient. And if it happens once as opposed to many, many times, which is maybe a different question with this. And I love that example of if it's payroll missed many, many times, or a deadline that's constantly not made, or a team member who comes across abrasively or offensively, at what point does extending grace turn into ignoring a pattern?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to your point, Philip, is like we know that if we're using Diana as the example of like she never misses payroll. So if she does, then of course we're going to give her grace, and we're also going to say like, when can we get paid? Because I need to be paid. And what can we do to help you? Is there anything that you need? We're going to do things like that. However, if it's like payroll rolls around, every time payroll rolls around and we are missing our paychecks, or it's coming several days late, or whatever, like we're going to start asking some different kinds of questions and start saying like, maybe there needs to be other conversations that happen and what's going on here. But I think that's where I would see some of that conversation. But Diana, what were you going to add to
Yeah,
it?
I was gonna say, like, I love this is such a good example that I wasn't expecting to come out of it. But you guys, I love how you've said we would immediately assume good intent, right? We would want our money, but we would immediately be like, okay, something is up. Diana got hit by a bus.
Yeah.
The bank is closed. What, like, something else is going on. This is not just Diana didn't just like decide to be a jerk today. So you would immediately assume good intent, but you would also say, like, and what do we do to fix it? And also, if this happened over and over, then you would no longer assume good intent. You would be like, something else is happening. We've given you a lot of grace, and you're still repeating this pattern. And so I do think that's when you kind of say, like, okay, there's a body of evidence now that shows that Diana no longer gets good intent assigned to her immediately. She now gets caution and questions assigned. And then after caution and questions are assigned for so long, then you start getting boundaries assigned. And I think there's like a natural progression to some of that stuff of like, yeah, you can't always forever in every situation assume good intent always and always and always, right? There is a body of evidence that builds, and then you have to say, okay, I'm no longer assuming good intent. Now I'm going to start putting in some good boundaries so that I'm protecting myself from this situation. So, yeah, I think it's important to remember that you guys started in the place of I'm assigning good intent with Diana because she's done nothing else to show me that she's doing this purposely, all the way to, okay, now we need to make some changes and I have to protect myself and I now can no longer assign good intent, something else up.
Yeah. And I think this is, and we were talking about, this is a topic that is very relevant inside of your workplace, but it's also very relevant inside of our personal lives, with our families, with friends. It's very relevant with just the world that we live in general, and the way that we think about people. And I think that sometimes we're either too quick to say on the other end, that's like, I'm just not assuming good intention ever, like never, because I just don't want to. Or it's the other side where it's like, okay, well, I've let this go on for too long and I'm totally ignoring the patterns that I see that are really harmful to me, but it feels like I can't set the boundary, or I can't speak up and say the thing that I need to say, or I can't hold this person accountable to make a change that probably needs to be made. And if you've ever like read the book Boundaries, I think it's by Dr. Henry Cloud. One of the things he says is that like setting boundaries is not selfish. So that's one thing. And that also people who are used to controlling situations and people will not respond well typically when you do set boundaries. Hopefully they do. And that's where we could like point back to the management cycle. If you've heard us talk about the management cycle, I think that's where you can point back to and say, like, hopefully that's sort of that same moment to say, like, there's a moment where we have to like give that feedback and we're assuming good intent, and we can hopefully coach people and they'll be really, they'll take ownership of it and they'll be coached, and we can maintain like a really good positive relationship and interaction. But sometimes when there's that pattern, right, then it's like typically they're maybe not going to respond well, and we're going to hold them accountable. And if that pattern continues, then we have different conversations within our organization specifically. And so I think that it kind of folds into that. But I think that's the point, is like when it becomes a pattern and it is not like, and it's different than what they are normally like, then I think that's a sign that, yeah, maybe we don't need to extend as much grace.
Yeah.
The example of payroll too, because that's, when we're thinking of a role, it's one of those thou shalts. Like in Diana's role, there's a few things. I mean, there's many things that Diana does, but there's a few where you're like, wow, these are the ones, if it's a miss, it impacts the whole team in a huge way. If it's a miss, it impacts all of our clients in a huge way. And I think every role has elements of thou shalt. So maybe it's not your entire role description, and at all times when there's ever a mistake made, you're always looking, with the nuanced eye. Because there's some things, there's accidents, misses, mistakes. The good intent is like, hey, we're on a team walking in the same direction. But I do think one of those other measures you both spoke to was when those thou shalts are especially happening at the expense, and it's because someone's using good intent as the smokescreen, then as a leader, it's like, well, no, actually not, because there's something on the system that's wrong. And maybe it's your workload, maybe it's clarity, maybe something else is happening. But now it's incumbent on me to lean in and investigate and find out why, because you're clearly not making this difference on your own. You probably want to. You would have done it on your own if you really wanted to. So assuming good intent can also as a leader, then to your point, Bethany, fork in the road. Here's the feedback. What do you see? And if they own it, great. If not, we're in a different conversation, much less grace.
I think one of the things that I see sometimes with this too is like a sign that you're in the wrong spot, right? Of like maybe assuming good intent has been like we're ignoring a pattern, is if it's just like we keep making excuses for one person, but that doesn't apply to everybody else. So if it's one person on the team or one person in the family or one person in the community, whoever, you know what I'm saying? If we are making excuses for this one person, but if anybody else were to do something that this person did, there would be issues, then I think that's kind of a red flag that I see too with it.
Yeah. And I love your point about like assuming good intent, but also digging a little bit deeper and investigating, like you were saying, Philip, like you guys, if I did miss payroll, I'll go back to that. You guys would assume good intent and you would still ask questions, right? Like you would be like, are you okay? And tell me what happened, right? Like, is it a flaw in the process? Is it a flaw in the whatever? And I think you can do that with coworkers and you can do that with people you live with and people in the community, right? Like I was thinking about a conversation I had the other day, and I won't even repeat what was said, but I just looked at the person and said, that's an odd thing to say out loud. Can you unpack your position? Right? Like, I'm not going to assume bad intent of you. I'm just going to ask you to unpack that more. Like, tell me more about that. And they did. And when they started talking, really talking through it, they were like, I guess I misspoke. And here's what I really think. And I was like, okay, good. I don't have to like assign bad intent to that. I just have to hear you out a little bit more. And I think the investigation part of the assigning intent often goes undone, right? Like, oh, Diana didn't mean to not pay us. She fixed it. It's fine. Instead of Diana didn't mean to not pay us. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And if this is a data point for us and we should collect some more data, and then also glad she fixed it.
What a pro example. I love that. It's just very gentle and then pushing it back, like, tell me more. I think another thing that we've seen leaders use, and also if you're trying to unpack what really happened without having to make a judgment call, you can just say, oh, hey, like, tell me the story. What happened? And then that allows someone to say, okay, I'm Diana and I woke up on Friday and Brock ran away and then I didn't push the button and that's why. And then the bank called because there was an issue, but I was picking up Brock from the whales in the Puget Sound and all the things. You're like, wow, okay, now we know why. I think deep down, honestly, it's just so hard to imagine Diana missing it. My first two thoughts would be like, either Diana is in grave danger and something terrible has happened, or second, like, the world is in such an existential threat. That is why Diana was prevented from getting payroll, because I just know it matters that much. So again, it's hard to imagine the scenario. But as we kind of think about this, maybe this is our last question as we round out then how to actionably make a difference with this. How can you acknowledge someone's good intent while also being honest about how their actions affected you or your team?
Oh, that's a deep question, right? Because I think a lot of times when something happens, like the payroll, and I didn't intend for it to happen, it's easy for me to say, like, guys, that I'm human. That wasn't my intent. Let it go. Get over it. And I think that that personal responsibility. Well, how did you phrase your question? How do you acknowledge someone's good intent while still being honest about how their actions affected you, right? Like,
Yes.
Yeah, I think you could come to me and say like, "Hey, I know you didn't mean to, but I need you to know that like several automatic payments didn't go through on my end, and I now have several late fees, and like these are the things that actually affected me and my family because you didn't do that. And I just need you to know that it's very serious for me and it really hurt me." And then I think you have to watch how that person reacts. And if that person is like, that's your problem, not mine, right? Like, then I think that's another data point for you to say, okay, next time I can draw a different boundary, or next time I can, but if that person looks at you and says, like, I totally understand, I'm so, so sorry. Let me give you this amount to cover the automatic payment fees, or I promise it will never happen again. Whatever it is, I think you watch that reaction so that you know how that person is going to treat you in the future, and if you should assign good intent to them in the future.
I like those examples. That's it. I think your first approach is like a very kind and just way to go to somebody, just so they recognize like the implications, the impact. I was thinking about like one way that I've done it, and some of the language that we use, but like let's say somebody said something that's like was not cool. It wasn't it wasn't great. It wasn't a good thing that they said. And the way that I've handled this before is being able to just kind of ask if they're sort of saying, well, this is what I said. I said what I said. That's not, not really what I meant. I think the way that I've come to somebody before is I've just sort of asked of like, oh, well, what were you hoping to accomplish with that? What was the outcome that you wanted to see happen? And did you get that result essentially? And I think that helps people sometimes, and you have to be careful about how you say that, right? Because it could come across any of these things like really negatively. So make sure you're calm in those conversations, I think, as well. But I think it's just helping people reflect back to be able to say, like, did that accomplish the thing that you were hoping it would accomplish too? And if not, then like, okay, well, like, let's talk about it. And like you said, Diana, see how they respond to that, to say, actually, yeah, that's what I really wanted that to happen, and screw you. Can we say that on here? It's not a cuss word, so it just sounds mean. I didn't say the other word. Or are they saying like, yeah, you know what? That's not exactly what I was hoping to see happen. That's not the outcome I wanted. That's not how I wanted to impact our relationship or our dynamic or whatever. And then figuring out like, yeah, and then as their ownership there to be able to say, I'm going to take this and do something different with it in the future. And so that's sort of an approach that I've taken.
Yeah. I'll also say that the question of like acknowledging someone's good intent while being honest about how they affected you, I think that a lot of times when you tell people what how they have affected you, people do initially get very defensive. So
Yeah.
I think it's okay to still assign some good intent even when it's defensive, right? But I think if that happens over and over and you don't see changes in someone, or you don't see that they're like avoiding doing that thing again to you, then I think that's when you say, okay, there's a boundary here that I need to put in place. And that is, I don't trust this person anymore. And I don't need to assign them good intent anymore because they have proven time and time again that they're not thinking about that.
I think when I work with teams a lot, and a lot of us do this, everyone's a little different sometimes. I like to ask them how people earn trust. Is trust something, if you're a new leader or new to a team, or is trust something that you give people, or is trust something that people have to earn? And there's a lot of people that approach it in different ways. There's no one size fits all. But when you're on the journey already on a team, trust is definitely there at some amount. And so I think when you have something go wrong, to assume good intent implies an amount of trust as well, which is why we would be so concerned if we didn't get payroll, because it would mean we've built up so much trust. Something is now impacting not just the action, but actually our trust and what we know to be real and true. So one thing I think that can maybe be part of this is that we always knowing as a leader, you're coming with your own assumed stories and intent as well. And I think the areas where we have seen that, like, air quote, good intent blow up the most is when people are stuck really strongly in, like, well, so-and-so had good intent and so did not. And so in how I talk to them and how I ask questions, I had good intent and they did not. And it's really that mix of two, like, you're both approaching with different intents. And maybe just in my own life, in a community circle I was a part of a few years ago, there was a moment where two leaders blew up over a difference of, you could just really plainly say, like, intent. And because I was there with the two of them, I was the one that was then hosting the conversation weeks later. And in a one-on-one with the person who I would say, like, had the most to own that went wrong, who actually was owning the least about what could happen in the future. There was a moment I said, hey, I want to apologize because I realized I think I came across a certain way when I said this about what you did. And I said, so I'm recognizing that. I just want to make sure that's really plain. Like, will you forgive me for that? And then the person responded and said, yes, I will. And I'm glad you're taking full ownership for everything that's happened. And so, kind of like how to acknowledge what was actually true and not true. I said, oh, let me be so clear. I said, I apologize specifically for the thing I do want to make clear that I totally did wrong. I said, and your actions still carried significant weight. And as the senior leader who's having this conversation with me now, we're still burning energy and time, not resolving the bigger issue that involves a whole team of people. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. And again, responded in a way where I think we muddled through it. It wasn't as ideal as I wanted it. So maybe that's the final thing I would add. Sometimes these conversations are just brutal. It may not be ideal, but knowing those boundaries, like Bethany talked about, and knowing those thou shouts and the maturity with it, like Diana had shared so much, can really equip you to have a conversation about intent and to look at it with maturity from all sides. That is our story, and we're sticking to it. We had good intent in making this podcast. If we have offended you, if you have any other ideas or questions, if you have more topics you want us to know about as well, we are all here for it. Lead well and be well.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic.